Good afternoon, Coronado Rotary. And welcome to another exciting week in our Grand Club. We'll start off with the Invocation Pledge. Heidi Langbehn-Allen. Good day, sir. Help me out there. Harder. Very good. You can call me Babs if you want.
It's Babs, you and me, we got this.
Right.
Good afternoon. We are thankful for our Rotary Fellowship together, with a hand of friendly understanding extended toward businesses and professions in our own community, to other clubs in our land, and to Rotary clubs beyond the sea. We rejoice in the challenge of life in these exciting times, and in the spirit of service above self. We pray that our personal lives may be channels for the flow of loving goodwill in all our relationships every day. Amen. Join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, visiting Rotarians and guests, our esteemed past president, Dan Orr.
Well, gang, we had one that found us. A casino owner. He graduated. What? Hear you. Can't hear me. I'm talking. I'm swallowing this microphone for crying sake. You mean you can't hear me? All right. He's upgraded from preschools to casinos from Las Vegas, Nevada. Please welcome our old friend Gary Bosch.
That's all I got.
Yeah. Now, my left, your right, guests of Rotarians. Gary?
Well, since it's here, I'd like to introduce my special guest, Brian Smock.
Looks like we get Rick and Mary.
Over here. Oh.
President Bob, fellow Rotarians, please welcome my wife, Ann. Hi, Ann.
President Bob and guests and Rotarians, I'd like to introduce Tiana Babcock from Fisher House, who will be telling us a little bit more about Fisher House later on.
Chris Keys, all the way in the back.
And President Bob, fellow Rotarians and guests, I'd like to introduce again for the third time my special guest, Chris Shearer.
That's it.
Okay.
On with the games. Jerry, though.
All right, well, thank you, past President Dan, and welcome to all our guests and special guests. Red Badgers in residence today. Andrew Gade, there's Andrew. Arlene Inch, there she is. Julie Lowell. Hey, Julie. And Joe Malloy on the tech team. Terry Siegenthaler. There we go. And Sarah Stillman. Hi, Sarah. Have I missed any Red Badgers? One more. Oh, Brandon. All right. Okay, let's go to Rotary announcements. Here we are. Well, welcome to August, and a lot going on. A lot of things. If you're a Red Badger, I hope you write these down. A lot of these are counters for moving through your checklist. Our August social is at Helen Kupka's house, and she says she has plenty of glasses. So all you need to bring for this is a dish to share and something to drink, and she will be well stocked for glassware, and you don't need to worry about that this month. Beach cleanup, second Saturday of every month, and no different this month either. We'll be at the corner of Ocean and Isabella on Saturday the 12th. Coffee to follow. Our board meeting, same place, Tuesday the 15th at 4:30. And we do have yet another wine tasting committee meeting, which are way fun to go to. And this one's actually going to be held at Jim Coughlin's place, which is the venue for the event itself. So that is always a great, fun last meeting before the big event.
The date and time are wrong. It's August 24th at 5.
Okay, August 24th at 5. Whoever prepared this slide should be shut up. Next slide. All right, let's go around and see what we did this past week. We had a great concert in the park, and I want to thank past President Suzanne Manuel for taking the helm on that one. A lot of good times were had there. Let's go to the next slide. And we do have additional photos if you're interested there on our Facebook page. So, okay, I'm going to turn this now over to Mary Griffin, who's going to welcome Tanya Babcock, who's our manager. We have two Fisher houses here at Balboa, and full disclosure, I'm actually a Fisher House board member, so it's near and dear to my heart. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, President Bob. Well, it's certainly my pleasure to introduce to you Tina Babcock. Tina. I even said it wrong. Tiana Babcock.
I answer to every name.
Tiana is the general manager of the Fisher House at the Naval Medical Center San Diego, which is, we know it as Balboa Hospital right up here on the hill. She has been there for how many years?
7.
7 years, and is an incredible lady to be working with. Because we have a lot of new members, we want to take an opportunity to tell you a little bit about Fisher House, and also how we have contributed to the families who we call our guests. The one in Balboa.
We do have 2 Fisher houses located at Naval Medical Center San Diego, which you all know as Balboa. Each of our houses have 8 guest rooms. So 9 guest rooms, pardon. So 9 and 9, we can serve 18 military families at any given time, and that's up to 54 guests. It is free of charge for the military families to stay at the Fisher House, and we serve active duty service members, veterans, retirees, and their families. Rank does not matter, or time served does not matter. As long as you have that military affiliation and you live 40 miles or more away from the Fisher House or the medical treatment facility where the service member or family member is at, then they're eligible to stay at the Fisher House. We do open our doors to military families beyond Naval Medical Center San Diego to include the VA, Scripps, Rady's Children's Hospital, and any civilian medical treatment facility that a service member or their family is at. Families are referred to us by case managers or social workers at the hospital who identify that they live 40 miles or more away and need lodging accommodations. And so our 2 houses, each family will get their own bedroom and ensuite bathroom, and then they share common areas to include a fully equipped kitchen, laundry room, dining room, family room, all the rooms, outdoor barbecue space, and patio seating. All the amenities that are provided for the families are donation-based. So the comforts of home are all provided by amazing organizations like Coronado Rotary Club. Families are staying with us for lots of different reasons, and I'll close this out with that. Whether baby is born prematurely, so mom and dad are staying at the house until baby gets to go home, to a training accident, or cancer diagnosis and chemotherapy takes place on a daily basis, families will be staying with us for those reasons. And when there's anything of a critical nature in Guam, Hawaii, or Japan, the families are medevaced or flown to Naval Medical Center San Diego for care. That's basically what we do. I can stay after and answer any questions for anyone. And Mary's going to tell you about all the amazing things that you all do for our military families at our 2 houses located at Naval Medical Center San Diego.
Perfect, thank you.
Morning, Tina. As Tiana said, we've been involved with many major projects in the last, many years. And most famous was our beloved lasagna dinner that we had originally started out with. Every month we would bring a lasagna dinner with salad, bread, and homemade cookies once a month and deliver it. The lasagnas were made down at Camp Surf. And so everybody loved doing that for the guests, and the guests really looked forward to it. Well, then along came COVID, and because of all those restrictions that were imposed upon us, we had to curtail that particular project. But we still wanted to do military, some kind of projects for the military families there. So, and I'm not sure exactly of this, oh, there we go, okay, of the order of the slides. This was our last project that we participated in. It was our end of year project, and these were the blankets. They needed more blankets up at the hospital, if you can believe, when it's 97 degrees. But this was during the winter, and so we bought blankets and hair dryers for all the rooms, so that all of them would be accommodated in the same way. So they were very, very grateful for this gift. Next slide, please. Then this was a real fun one. We had in January, we kind of had a leeway of some of the restrictions being lifted, and they said, well, you know what we could use is food, because a lot of the people come here and they don't have transportation to go out and get food. So we had 4 teams that went out once a month between January and June, and we filled shopping carts with frozen food, entrees, food, grab-and-go food to go, some vegetables, some fruits. Tiana would always make up a list of those things that they need. They needed, washing compound for their clothes. So we went on these really fun trips. Let's see, next slide, please. Here is our famous landscape gardening group. Right, John?
Dedicated.
In 21 and 22, we were unable to go in the house or to bring food. So we decided to be creative. We said, well, what else can we do? So we became landscapers up at the property. We pulled weeds, we dug out rose bushes. I don't know if Karen Ledline is here today. You should see her with a pickaxe. I didn't get in her way. But we had a great time. We had a lot of dedicated people. It was warm, it was summertime, and we were there for like 4 or 5 times. We went out digging ditches and pulling weeds, and there was past President Luann and Carol. I can't see the rest of them, but a whole fun group of people that were really dedicated and worked hard. So I thank all of them. Let's see. There we go. There's John too. Then at the end of the fiscal year, if we have funds left over, we would find items that would call Tiana and say, what is the most needed item that you have? So the first thing was patio furniture. We provided patio umbrellas, bedspreads, wall sconces, the new blankets and dryers. And we're currently brainstorming to find out what the next step will be. So I know there's so many of you on the committee, and you want to know, what can we do? What can we do? So we're thinking maybe a barbecue once a month, but we still have to go over some restrictions on that. But anyway, if anybody has any ideas, please see me afterwards. Thank you for taking the time today to listen, and we look forward to our continued support at Fisher House. Thank you.
Thank you, Past President Murray. And Dr. Chris Kleber is going to talk to us about CART. He's got a couple of videos.
Start the timer. I'll wave at you. Okay. Well, thank you very much, President Bob, guests, and fellow Rotarians. First slide, please. I'm coming to you today to talk about CART again. And we're going to start off with a message that President Gordon McNally of Rotary gave us for about 2 minutes. Go ahead and play that, please.
Greetings to all Rotary members across the globe. I'm humbled by the opportunity to serve as Rotary President for 2023 and 2024. In the year ahead, we will make progress towards eradicating polio and create hope in the world through service projects in our areas of focus. But I want to spend a couple of minutes discussing another important way Rotary will create lasting change this year by focusing on mental health. People today are hurting. Many of them don't know how to ask for help. But everyone needs a safe place where people of all ages and in all cultures can share triumphs and open up about life's challenges. Rotary can be that place. In Rotary, we show comfort and care to each other. We invite our members to bring their whole authentic selves. And we move beyond the simple question of, how are you? To ask, how are you really? Research shows that performing acts of kindness is the most effective step anyone can take to protect our sense of well-being and to make us more resilient to all the challenges life throws our way. Mental wellness is deeply personal to me. I know what it's like to see someone close to me suffer through adversity in silence and be eaten up by it. But I have also witnessed the power of personal connections, the value of holding space to discuss emotional and mental well-being, and the life-saving impact of access to preventive care and treatment. So let's work together to erase stigmas, raise awareness and improve access to mental health services, so that together we can support one another and our loved ones, our clubs and our communities, create hope in the world.
Thank you very much, President McNally.
Greetings to...
Greetings to you too, sir. Okay, back to CART, if we can, Kristen. And I asked last time, how many of you have been affected by Alzheimer's in one way or another? And every time you give a talk like this, you see those hands go up, and you just go, wow. So again, the CART, Coins for Alzheimer's Research Trust, seeks to invest in promising young scientists and research that's higher risk, but could have a much higher impact if that research could be sustained. Next slide, please. Next one, please. Okay, so if you think of CART as the seed funding, it's going to fund research that now the researchers can go to the National Institute of Health, which funds 98% of Alzheimer's researches, but you got to get on the dance floor. You got to be a tree before you can start growing into a tree and then make a forest to find the cure. Next slide, please. There is no cure now for Alzheimer's yet, but we are diligently working on it. If you look at the MRI of a healthy brain versus a severely demented Alzheimer's brain, you can't help but wonder, how can we cure this dreaded disease? Next slide, please. One of our own was taken by Alzheimer's. Loving mother, wife, before her time. Next slide, please. But she had double markers, genetically tested, so she knew it was coming and how to make the best of it. Passed away at age 74, a diagnosis at 68. Fortunately, she knew all her family members until the end. That's not always the case. Next slide, please. When you look at, this was my mother, And the drawing is very indicative of advanced Alzheimer's. They sleep a lot. They have that 1,000-yard stare that just goes right through you, right through the center of your heart. And how do you tell your child why doesn't grandma know who I am? It gets you. If you take one thing away today from this talk, next slide please. ALZ.org. These 6 letters will be your best resource in how to get the information, get support, and go down the road that others have gone before, but hopefully fewer will go down in the future. Next slide, please. So what can you do? First of all, you got to know the early warning signs. We're going to talk about those a little bit. And some tips for avoiding Alzheimer's in yourself, and also be active in the CART Fund. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. Alzheimer's is a brain disease which causes problems with memory, thinking, and behaviors. Next slide, please. So the 10 early signs of Alzheimer's: memory loss and disrupting of regular life, your activities of daily living, challenges in planning and problem solving, difficulty with familiar and routine tasks, things you've done thousands of times, you can't remember how to do them, confusion on time and place of where you are, and understanding the images and spatial relations of those things around you. Next slide, please. Problems speaking and writing clearly, misplaced things, retracing steps frequently, poor judgment on a personal safety and falling, withdrawing from social and work events, and change in moods and personality, and absolutely frustration. Frustration's huge. Why? Why is this happening to me? Next slide, please. I will tell you from dealing with Alzheimer's for many years with my mother, the longer you wait to confront the changes due to Alzheimer's, the harder it is on the patient and especially on the family. The more you can early identify these patterns and seek help, the better you have a chance to rectify those and make the passage down the road a little easier. Next slide, please. So, what can you do? Stay physically active. Adopt a healthy diet. Stay mentally and socially active. Very important to do that. And good sleep patterns. The researchers are finding all kinds of links that go to these. Next slide, please. And be prepared, just like a Boy Scout. If Alzheimer's enters your life, be prepared. Understand the disease, the diagnosis, the stages, and the treatments. It's very complex, but the resources are there. Alzheimer's.alz.org. Don't forget those 6 letters. Legal planning with the power of attorney for healthcare and financial, trust, wills, conservators, what happens when, and know what's going to happen when, and be prepared for it. As I said, the longer you delay in knowing when these next steps come, the more difficult it is for the family and particularly the person. The daily care, activities of daily living. There are wonderful people out there that can help them with it. And you can save one, you can't save them both when that happens. And so you have to be very cognizant of the caregivers around and what their limitations and what their abilities are. And then call in people that can help you with that. There are family support groups. And then there's also working on finding the cure. Next slide, please. Roger Ackerman was the founder of CART. His mother-in-law had Alzheimer's. And if you recall, our own Bob Watson with his program of Rotarians at Work. And look how that has spread, because one person had an idea and one person was brave enough to advance that idea forward. And now that's worldwide with Rotary. We're giving people, us Rotarians. We give until almost we can't. But there's always more to give. Next slide, please. So it said coins for Alzheimer's research. Well, guess what? There's cash, credit cards, coin collections, anything of value. You find a way to get it here, I'll take it and I'll find out. You'll be seeing this big blue bucket around there. That's one way. In the future, there'll be little blue cups on the table. You take one of those home and with a card, maybe you can fill up with empty that penny jar out or something like that. You bring it here, I'll get it to the bank and get it to the right place. There'll also be buckets on the tables during the meetings. If you want to throw a penny, a dime, a dollar, whatever you want to put in there, a Visa card, we'll take care of it. Okay, next slide. All right, that's a little bit about CART. We're going to hear from the executive director of the CART program back on the East Coast, Tiffany Urban. So if you go ahead and play that video. Oops.
No matter how you say it, one person, just one, can make a difference. There's no better example of the power of one than the CART Fund. One man, Roger Ackman, back in 1996, had a crazy idea that if enough of his friends in the Sumter Rotary Club would donate their pocket change at lunch every week, maybe, just maybe, they could help find a cure for Alzheimer's disease.
Sounds crazy, right? But those Rotarians in South Carolina, along with thousands more like them, have raised millions of dollars in cutting-edge research grants. All because one man said, I have an idea.
Today, the CART Fund, Points for Alzheimer's Research Trust, still maintains the same traditions, values, and intentions of our late founder, Roger Ackman. 100% of every donation is distributed via grants to recognized research institutions across the U.S. Facilities like Harvard, Emory, Washington University in St. Louis, University of Pennsylvania, the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, and more than 50 others.
What began by throwing spare change into little blue buckets during Rotary Lunch Club meetings has now grown into collections by local businesses, innovative fundraisers, matching gifts, and in 2020, an online donor portal that accepts donations from anyone, anywhere in the world.
Led by a part-time executive director and a volunteer board of trustees, CART is a 501c3 organization by 23 Rotary districts in the U.S. A distinguished scientific research panel reviews the annual grant submissions and recommends awards based on the amount of money raised during the preceding year. In 2021, CART awarded $1 million in research grants for the third consecutive year, bringing the grand total to more than $10 million in the organization's short history. Research findings supported by CART grants have jump-started millions more in federal funding.
Stop that. Well, thank you very much for letting me have a chance to talk to you. I'll be back.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Preston. We will be hearing more about CART in future months. And sorry we couldn't hear all of the rest of that, but I'm going to turn it over to Kit Williams and for a real quick challenge for Emd Polio Now.
Thank you, President Bob, fellow Rotarians and guests. The most important reason for the Emd Polio Now wine tasting is to raise money for this worthy cause. And I'd like to introduce 3 generous donors who have put a $30,000 challenge out there, matching challenge, dollar for dollar, to all of you. I'd like to introduce and bring up to the front Carol Summer, Ron Vernetti, and Arlene Inch.
Look at all that red, huh? If you're wearing an Emd Polio Now shirt, stand up.
Yeah, right, yes.
Woohoo! Over here. The latest in the fashion trends in Coronado, I should tell you.
Well, it's time to have some fun, Rotarians. Right?
Yes.
And what is more fun in Rotary than embracing service above self? And especially when it comes to children and preventing them from having to incur the ravages of polio. Kit mentioned the challenge match, and during July your committee has been hard at work on securing pledges to meet that challenge. And I'm happy to tell you now that we've gone as far as $24,000 toward the 30,000. $2,000 last week after our speaker, Steve Howell, who took us through his polio journey.
Here's his check.
Oh, okay. Okay. $2,000 from Steve. Isn't that nice? So, my fellow Rotarians, our fund today is to get that additional $6,000. And then we'll be at our goal, and that will get the committee off to a great start in getting what we need to help fight polio and get the Gates Foundation's 2-to-1. So, let's see. How about a few pledges from our dedicated Rotarians here? Who's willing? The amount doesn't matter. Helen?
I'll make up the difference.
Oh, Helen. Wow, Helen. Thank you so very much. That was a surprise. A pleasant one. Very pleasant. Jim?
Even though you don't need my money anymore, I'll give 2,000.
2,000 from Jim Cochran. Wonderful. Thank you, Jim. Any others? Okay, that's just great. That's just great. Thank you, Helen and Jim. Appreciate that so much.
Thank you all, and thank you, Helen and Jim, for getting us back on schedule. All right, I will turn it over to Marv, who will be delighted to introduce our very interesting guest speaker.
Thank you, President. Fellow Rotarians and guests, I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker today. Heidi Langbehn is raised in Germany, France, and Spain, but joins us today from Escondido. Her father, Willie, was 13 when the Nazis took him away and enlisted him in Hitler's army. He spent the last days of World War II fighting the Russian advance on the Eastern Front. Heidi has captured her father's story from taped recollections and her interviews with him. Her book, Save the Last Bullet, Memoir of a Child Soldier in Hitler's Army, was published last year and is a 2023 International Firebird Book Award winner. Ms. Heidi Langbehn.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today and to be allowed to share my father's story with you. I think I'm going to step forward so that I can see the slides, which are going to be advanced by Joe. And since Marv already introduced me, I'll just get right to this story since we have very little time and I think a lot of ground to cover. So if you would go to the next slide, I'd like to play a clip of a podcast that was done when I had not published my book yet, and a podcaster took a chance on me. And after that, I'll read you one page of the book because I think it is relevant to what I'm going to talk about next, and then we'll go through the timeline of events and my father's experience and how he ended up being a boy soldier at the end of World War II in Hitler's army, and behind that the background of the historical events, which I'll explain to you as we go. So go ahead and click first.
Papa and I were walking to the train station. The dawn sky had a strange orange glow and there were faint noises I couldn't recognise. I slowed down a bit, but Papa pulled on my arm. "Hurry, Billy, there's something going on here in which I don't want to get involved." We rounded the corner to a chaotic scene of firefighters dousing the smouldering ruins of a synagogue. One night, a kid from our group snuck into the SS depot and swiped some ham. The hunger was too painful to bear. But the SS caught him red-handed. It turned out that stealing carried the death penalty by firing squad. In each hole stood a man or a boy like me, armed with anti-tank rocket launchers. We waited in oppressive silence. I felt the ground vibrate. A deep growl filled the air as a dark wall of tanks appeared, and I swallowed hard. As we watched from behind the wall, we saw an SS soldier grab a young kid and tie his hands with a rope. Then he produced another, longer rope, and it was obvious what was going to happen. Our lieutenant looked at us and said, "All of you, come with me." From the unpublished memoir of a child soldier in the Nazi army by Wilhelm Johannes Langbehn. Preview, Save the Last Bullet on the Fighting Through podcast.
So I'll read you one page, an excerpt of the book, and you can skip the, well, I guess it's just a little bit of an introduction. Austria, Wiener Neustadt, 31 March or 1 April 1945. We stood in the holes we had dug at a distance about 10 meters from each other. In each of them there was a man, or a 14-year-old boy like me. Each of us had 4 Panzerfäuste, anti-tank rocket launchers at his disposal. The transport truck for the Panzerfäuste was a short distance behind us, so we could get more in case it became necessary. Because it was a disposable weapon and could only be fired once. If you fired your 4 Panzerfäuste and more tanks were coming, you better had run back to the truck to get replenished. My fellow soldiers and I stood in our holes and waited in oppressive silence. Nobody spoke. Time was passing too slowly and too quickly all at the same time. I knew a battle was coming and that I might die, but my brain was too jumbled to formulate the great thoughts that I imagined one should have in those moments. The minutes crawled by as I felt a vein pulsing in my neck. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a tiny voice was admonishing me that I was running out of time. To do what, I was not sure, maybe to live. But I couldn't focus on that because we had a job to do. Fear was something we could not afford. Then I felt it, the deep rumble, the growl in the earth under my feet, pulsing its way up through my bones. Soon the tanks appeared, the dark silhouettes materializing just over the horizon. I grabbed a Panzerfaust. The Russians had a famous tank, the T-34, the most versatile tank around. It could run over anything. Father Stalin had given his soldiers excellent weapons, we had been told. Now I could see them firsthand. There were so many. The wall of tanks rolled inexorably closer, partly obscuring the sky. As they approached, I saw the Russian grenadiers marching behind the tanks with their bayonets pointing straight ahead. The T-34s started getting within shooting range. I raised the Panzerfaust onto my right shoulder, tucked it under my armpit, and looked through the viewfinder to locate my target. The weapons instructor's words played back in my head. Let the tank advance to a distance of exactly 20 meters from you, no more, no less. You only get one shot at this. At 20 meters, your shell will penetrate the hull of the tank. Any further, and you will miss. No time left to grab another weapon and aim it. Any closer, you won't have time to shoot anymore. Even if you shoot, it will run you over. I glanced at the 20-meter mark I had previously located in the field in front of me to estimate the tank's distance correctly. It was a whitish boulder. Close, they're close. I squared my stance. Right eye on the viewfinder, left eye shut. I zeroed in on the tank directly in front of me. A drop of sweat stung my right eye. I blinked furiously. Shoot. Home in again. God, it's big. The tank reached the white boulder. Steady, steady, now. I pulled the trigger. The shell blasted off. I held my breath. So this happened to my father when he was 14 years old. And so now I'm going to go through the historical events and my father's life through those. So if you'd advance the next slide. My father was born in 1930 in the town of Witten in the vicinity of Bonn and Cologne in northwest Rhine-Westphalia, which I've outlined here for you. It is close to the border with the Netherlands and with Belgium, and it is known as the focus of a lot of Allied bombing because it was the center of steel and coal industry in Germany. And so we'll go to the next slide. So again, my father was born in 1930 in the city of Witten. As probably most of you are familiar with the history, and in 1933 Hitler rose to power after the fire at the Reichstag, after which he took emergency powers, which he never relinquished. In 1935, the Nazis were changing the narrative in the school textbooks. So you would see, if you held them next to each other, the older books and the newer books, you would see references changing. And language, as you know, is very powerful. So you had references, for instance, to family and God, and they were changed to blood and soil, and the glorification of Hitler as the savior instead of God as our savior. So the narrative started changing. In 1936, my father started elementary school. In 1938, my father witnessed what he afterwards realized was Kristallnacht, the aftermath. And in that clip, he relates that story as he saw when he was walking to school with his father, the synagogue that was burnt up. And he couldn't understand, and his father did not want to have anything to do with it. He never got an explanation. As things then quickly started evolving in 1939, of course, Germany invaded Poland September 1st, and then the war was declared on Germany by England and France. What is important about that date as well is a little bit of background on the well-known Hitler youth organization, Hitler Youth. There is a precursor to that organization called the Jungvolk. So children, boys, were enrolled in Jungvolk at age 10, from 10 to 14. From 14 to 18, they were graduated into the Hitler Youth, and from that on, during wartime, the 18-year-olds immediately were conscripted into one of the branches of the armed forces. This organization was generally really known before as Boy Scouts. It was, these were youth organizations that were appropriated by the Hitler regime and then manipulated and modified to indoctrinate children into believing in the Nazi ideology and becoming unquestioning of its authority. And that organization, those youth groups were actually voluntary until 1939. So in 1939, the organization became mandatory. The enrollment then of my father occurred in 1940 when he turned 10 years old. So he joined the Jungvolk. We can advance to the next slide. So these are a few just images of my father as a young child with his parents and the school books. If you see here on the right-hand bottom corner, you will see my father sitting. He's the kid with the glasses in the back, with a Nazi handler standing right behind him. And I'll go into that a little bit later. So we can go to the next slide. There is another organization, it's another program, that is called Kinderlandverschickung, KLV, and it's loosely translated as Children's Rural Relocation Program. This was also a voluntary program, and it was purportedly to save city children from Allied bombing, to protect them, and they were removed from their parents, from the influence of their parents and the church, and they were sent to rural areas, again, under the guise of protection, but in reality, of course, to further advance the ideology. And this was voluntary, except the Nazis realized that the parents didn't too enthusiastically adhere to the program on a voluntary basis, so they helped them along with that. So in 1943, in the area of Nordrhein-Westfalen, the government closed all the schools, primary and secondary schools. Well, it was a violation of the law to not have your children enrolled in schools. Therefore, now parents were facing imprisonment, lest they allow their children to go to the KLV. So in 1943, my father, 13 years old, was shipped off with his entire class and with the teachers and a Nazi handler who was with them 24/7 and reported every bit of activity back to the government, to the south of Germany, to Lake Constance, which some of you might know. It's a very beautiful place, actually, close to the border with Switzerland. This is the last time my father was to see his parents, with one exception, until after the war ended. So they were separated. There was basically no communication after that, very little. By the second half of 1944, the SS paid a visit to the school and handpicked my father and two classmates because of their height and their strength. They were the biggest and the strongest. So the SS then proceeded to explain to them that they had been bestowed with the great honor of becoming soldiers of the Reich, and they were going to receive military training, and then they would be reincorporated in school until they had the chance to lay their lives down for the fur at a time in the future. So they went ahead and had the training, so that's where my father was taught to handle weapons such as the Panzerfaust, which is that single fire weapon, a bazooka, and the Sturmgewehr, which was a very advanced machine gun at the time, as well as other hand weapons like a hand pistol. Then they were reincorporated into their school, and now fast forward, we get to December of 1944. Things are getting very dire for Germany. At that point, the children are in fact evacuated for safety purposes, and also strategically to get closer to what was becoming the Eastern Front, which was Austria. So they were moved to a remote village called Schleching in the mountains in the Alps, the German Alps, close to Austria, just before Christmas of 1944. Hunger was rampant, malnutrition pervasive. The children had nothing to eat. There was no food. All the animals had been killed. There were no supplies. Communications were completely cut off. At this point, the children had to resort to, they were eating beets. That's all they had to eat. And so they had to resort to stealing. There was a butcher in the village whose cellar they were able to break into. So they would help themselves to some ham and cheese and sausages every once in a while to stave their hunger. In February of 1945, the SS showed up and set up camp at Schleching. And a young boy decided to steal food from the SS depot, which was very, very well stocked. And unfortunately, he was caught red-handed. That boy was executed in front of all of his peers, summarily, for reasons of rule by fear and intimidation, and it worked quite well. And so that poor child lost his life that day. And that's something that my father was haunted by for the rest of his life. This is February 1945 already. So in March, only a month later, the time comes. So the SS tells him, okay, it's your turn to serve the Führer. And so he and his two comrades were shipped off to the Eastern Front, which turns out was actually at the gates of Vienna. So he arrives at what was the Eastern Front, to Wiener Neustadt, which is a city just south of Vienna, to stave off the advance of the Russians to liberate Vienna, which occurred two days later. So he was possibly in the last battle. He didn't know this at the time either, and he found out later. Possibly the last large-scale battle to stave off the advance of the Russians onto Vienna. He was severely wounded. He almost lost his life. I'll say this too, the Nazi handlers told the boys to save the last bullet for themselves, because to be taken prisoner by the Russians was a fate worse than death, because they would torture you before they killed you. Luckily, my father didn't listen and used his last bullet to defend himself in a hand-to-hand combat, and prevailed, obviously. Otherwise I wouldn't be here today. That then became, of course they were overwhelmed by the Russian forces. They went into retreat, and it became a mad dash to get to the demarcation line. What was left of the unit had learned that the country was to be divided into a Russian-controlled zone and an American-controlled zone. And of course, they desperately wanted to get the American-controlled zone, which was north of the river Enns in a city called Lietzen. So they retreated. It took them about a month to get there. They crossed that bridge, north of which the U.S. forces were going to be, on the 7th of May of 1945. And as many of you know, that's a very important date. They did not know anything other than they were running from the Russians. The Americans were already there. They found that out the next day. And the Russians arrived about the 10th or 11th. So they just got away. And that night, the war ended. Germany capitulated. They did not know this until the next morning, when my father actually ran into American forces, accidentally, in full uniform. But you have to read the book about that. Anyway, so nothing happened. The unit was, it was agreed that the unit was going to give themselves up to the American forces, which they did a few days later, in an agreed upon location. And they were not prisoners of war. They were not POWs because they had been taken prisoner after the war ended. So they were called interned persons. And it seems like the Americans didn't quite know what to do with them, so they needed to triage them out. They were in this temporary camp outdoors, no facilities. And so my father accurately surmised when they were getting discharged that he should go with the men who said that their peacetime occupation was farming, because he noticed that those who said that were put in a different line from everybody else. And so he was quick on his feet, I guess, and he thought, ooh, they're going to go home. So he said his peacetime occupation was student and farmer, and that probably changed the course of his life, because the other line, in fact, was sent to sweet mines in France and didn't return home till 1947, 1948, and he was sent home. You know, after quite an ordeal of getting home, where he almost lost his life as well, he was paralyzed from the waist down. He was in a convoy that very much, I think, was in a way retribution for what the Germans had done to the Jews, and they were sent back in open cattle cars in the same conditions that the Jews had been treated. And so the dead had to be thrown off the wagons as they died on their feet because there was no space. My father was paralyzed from the waist down, but he was very lucky. He was nursed back to health by a British field hospital, and he actually regained most of the sensation back in his body. So after that, he returned to home to find that his town had been destroyed, about 80% destroyed, by firebombing on March the 19th, 1945. And he was mandated to do a year of forced farm labor, which he served, after which he was reinstated into school to finish secondary school. That is when he learned the extent of what really happened, the atrocities that had been committed in his name. And so he was extremely angry, very depressed, because he felt he was made complicit in these atrocities where he had neither control over nor did he have any knowledge of. And a British soldier, actually, a kind British soldier, helped him overcome this depression and gave him a notion or a vision of a possibility of a unified democratic Europe where Germany could have a seat at the table. And so that planted the seed for the rest of my father's life. He decided to dedicate his life to ensuring that what happened to him and to others would never happen again on his watch. And he became a lawyer. He became a civil servant and worked for the German Foreign Service. In 1979, he was awarded the Medal of European Merit for his contributions to the advancement of democracy in Europe, and served the last 15 years of his career with NATO, and where he was the chief of the legal division of NATO Germany. He also authored the contract for the Tornado airplane, the NATO plane, which is now being decommissioned, so actually that was his his claim to fame. He finally agreed to narrate his memoirs in German on 16 tapes in 2007 at age 77, which are the basis for the book that I wrote. These are his words. And he passed away, unfortunately, in 2018 before I was able to finish the book. But I did finish it, and I hope this has been interesting to you, to see a little bit of the other side and what really happened on the other side. And if there's any time for questions, I'll be happy to take those. And I can
So, over there.
I thank you. Were your dad's parents alive when he returned, back home to the forced farm labor?
He was lucky that his parents were still alive. Yes. Yeah, they had my grandmother was taken to a location, a rural location, so she was safe. And my grandfather was too old because he had served in World War I, so he was actually luckily not taken to war where he probably wouldn't have survived.
Did your father stay in Germany, or did he come to the United States, and how did you come to the United States?
Yeah, no, my father stayed in Germany. Well, actually he had international posts all over the world. I actually grew up in France. And he was with the European Space Research Organization at the time, and then moved on to NATO and other jobs for Germany. He came to visit the United States, but my being here has nothing to do with it. I actually ran into an American soldier, a long time ago, and he's retired Navy. He's a U.S. Navy veteran. And we live here in Escondido, long-term residents of Poway and Escondido.
This is a fascinating story. Back in September, my wife and I toured the Churchill war rooms with an au pair who had worked for us many years ago. So she's 58 years old, her son's 24 years old, Germans. Going through the Churchill war rooms, which of course is very much about individuals, people, battles. So I asked them what they knew about World War II and what they learned in their school system. Mm-hmm. And I'd be interested in your response to that. Theirs was pretty much not much.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Now I'm just a little bit older than the lady. So smidge. I went to the German School of Paris, and there I have to say, the German Guild weighs heavily, I think, on the German conscience still today, and I think it should. It's a good thing. And the Germans, I think, have been extremely forthcoming about wanting to make reparations. So in my youth, I still thank my teachers today. They had a mandatory field trip for us when we were 15 years old, to the concentration camp of Dachau. And I will never forget that.
So Heidi, I asked you about the movie Jojo Rabbit, and many of us here have seen that movie from several years ago. Tell us what you thought of it.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I watched the movie while I was writing the book, and I said, oh my God, this is a fictionalized account of my father's real story. That's exactly what happened to him.
We have to watch it again.
So yeah, it might be, as a satire, and it's a somewhat exaggerated, but really not that much.
Heidi, on behalf of the Coronado Rotary Club, thank you for coming and sharing this most exciting and interesting story. And I personally will look forward to getting a copy of that book and reading it myself. What a treasure to have you here. Thank you for coming. Okay, we are next week, and we're going to be at the Coronado Cays Yacht Club. And just a reminder, I did flash a slide up there earlier, and that was that the prices for lunch are going to go up to $35 a share for that. So if you're ready for that next week, be forearmed. Next week's speaker will be Jim Kempton of the Surf Museum. So we'll look forward to that. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful and productive Rotary week. Service above staff.
Recording stopped.